It's just a very convenient way of knocking a whole bunch of people off and just chalking it up as part of the lifestyle. And they've been doing that forever. I don't know if you've read Dave McGowan's book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, all about
No.
the Laurel Canyon scene of the 1960s, the hippie counterculture era. I reference it in my book. There's a whole chapter in my book where I go into it. And Dave McGowan details the massive number of celebrities, of musicians, and those around them, close family and friends, that emerged out of that Laurel Canyon scene in Los Angeles in the mid to late 1960s. And the amount of bodies, the body count that's been chalked up as suicides, overdoses, tragic accidents is just ridiculous. People dying in their 20s, their 30s, of one reason or another. And it goes so beyond the realms of coincidence and regular odds that it's just absurd.
Yeah, and I often wonder if, because you talked about, who was it? Was it John Lennon that made the 20-year deal that you talk about? I wonder if they make a deal like a 5-year. I mean, I don't know, or maybe or 7-year, 10-year. But I wonder if they make a specific deal, or I wonder if they just do something wrong or become disposable. I often wonder the why of it. Was it their time was up? You know what I'm saying? Was their contract up, right? Or did they cross the wrong people? Or, as we know, are we all just that disposable, which we know is true, right?
Well, I just find there's no easy answers to any of these questions. The whole thing just runs so deep and is so convoluted that you have to have a very open mind to be able to take all this information on, and you have to be prepared to consider all kinds of options. So when it comes to the early deaths of musicians, the likes of Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Bob Marley, John Lennon, there's all kinds of possibilities. So a lot of researchers will tell you that many of these artists in some way fake their deaths, and they slink off into the background somewhere and live out their remaining years in obscurity away from the public spotlight. That's certainly something you heard with Elvis Presley. A lot of people had trouble accepting that Elvis was actually dead. And when you get into some of the fine detail and some of the forensic evidence surrounding the supposed death of Elvis Presley and his funeral, it does become very compelling, the suggestion that he might not actually have died. Elvis worked undercover as, some say a CIA agent. He certainly worked with the police departments of various big cities in the US and with the Drug Enforcement Agency. So in some respects, he was kind of an undercover spy. He had those connections into military intelligence. So the suggestion comes that it was decided he would be retired, or his public persona as a musician would be retired, and he would go off into obscurity, into the background, and live out his remaining years, possibly continuing that sort of intelligence work. That certainly seems plausible to me. Then you get similar things with Jim Morrison, who's an absolutely endlessly enigmatic character to get into. When you factor in the fact that his dad was Admiral Morrison, who commanded the Gulf of Tonkin fleet, which basically started the Vietnam War. That's some very interesting background information on Jim Morrison. Then you got the fact that Morrison was always portrayed as this kind of pagan shaman type figure, very much into the supernatural, very much into other realms of existence. He was into various rituals and various occult ceremonies and such. And that calls into question the official story of his death. So, official rock music lore has it that Jim Morrison died at the age of 27. He was a member of the 27 Club, and he just happened to overdose. There we go again, another overdose, and was found dead in a bathtub in his apartment in Paris. But you then get stories that Jim Morrison, in fact, faked his death. There was no coroner's report. There was no autopsy. There was no body seen. So we've only got the word of these official sources that he did actually die. And so many people think that Jim Morrison was also an asset of the military intelligence community, tied in with the world of the dark occult, because those two go hand in hand, and didn't actually die. And then you get artists like Michael Jackson. There are similarly claims that Michael Jackson never actually died. And more recently, we've had Prince. Now, with Prince, it really does seem to me that Prince actually passed away. And in my view, he was knocked off. And there's any number of reasons as to why his controllers might have chosen to knock him off, not least the comments that he made in interviews in recent years about the nature of the establishment, about chemtrails, about the hold that record companies have over their artists. He's even supposed to have made a comment about the Zionist Jews that control the record industry are the reason I'll never play in Israel. Now, if he really did make a comment like that, you can understand why that would hack off certain parties to the point where he would be considered a liability and somebody that needs to be gotten rid of. So with Prince, I really do feel he was knocked off. That's my personal feeling. With John Lennon, I mean, the jury is still out. Some people would tell you that he became a thorn in the side and a pain in the arse of the establishment, so he had to go. Others will tell you that he faked his death and that he's still alive. There's a researcher called Miles Mathis who has written a very extensive essay suggesting that John Lennon is still alive and performing as a musician by the name of Mark Stacer. If you go to milesmathis.com, you can read his article on this. So it depends on the individual artist, I think. You can't make a blanket statement such as the industry knocks off a whole bunch of artists young and apply it to all these famous names, because in each case the circumstances differ. So I think it's a mixture of some artists faking their deaths and it in some way being a hoax, and other artists genuinely being taken out. And there would be a kind of ritual, sacrificial element to that as well. So when the decision is taken to knock somebody off that's become a pain in the arse and a thorn in the side, it's done in a ritualistic fashion in line with the dark occult beliefs of this religious priest class that control these industries. So, it's very difficult to make a blanket statement about all these artists.
Right, about why. Let's back up and let's start with introducing our amazing guest. And we are speaking to the amazingly awake and talented Mr. Mark Devlin, who has written, I found out by reading your book that you've actually written other things than just this work. So Why don't we start at the beginning? Could you tell us the name of your book that we're going to be discussing today and how we can get a hold of that?
Okay, well, the book is called Musical Truth. I've got a copy here. Let me see if this shows up. There it is. Bit of a doorstop. And this book is the culmination of my 5 years worth of research into the true nature of the corporate music industry and who really controls it and to what end, and all these dark, malevolent, nefarious things that go on beneath the surface gloss. So I first came across all this information in 2010, which is the year that I refer to as having woken up, undergone a conscious awakening, come to a realization that this world, this realm of existence, is nothing like we've spent our entire lives believing it is. And that is an understatement, if anything. So I came to these devastating, world-changing realizations back in 2010. And straight away, when I realized that I'd spent my entire life being deceived, duped, mugged off, as we say, I had to understand how it was done. I had to understand how I'd been taken in. I'm somebody that has to know these things. I have to know the truth. Sometimes the truth is deeply unsettling. Sometimes it devastates and rocks your world. But you're either somebody that wants truth no matter what, or you're somebody that is prepared to live their life being deceived and with their head in the sand. You're somebody that can handle the truth, to use that phrase, or you're not. So I fit into the former category, and I had to understand particularly how the industry that I've been a part of for so long, because by that point, I'd worked in the music industry for 20 years as a radio and club DJ. I'd written for various music magazines, and I'd just been a part of the overall mechanism of the music industry here in the UK. And so when I came to realize that the industry played its part along with all these other facets, Hollywood movies, the financial banking sector, the mainstream media, the world of science, the world of military, all these different walks of life, they all feed ultimately into the big picture of what's going on, who's running things. And the music industry is just one spoke in that massive wheel, if you like. So I set about understanding the tactics and the methods that had been used by that industry to mind control large numbers of people. and sow perceptions and values and belief systems into the minds of large numbers of people over many, many decades. So it was a long process, as you can imagine. That's why it took 5 years to do the research. And I reached a point in about 2014 where I felt to put everything that I'd learned into a book. I'm someone that's always enjoyed expressing myself through writing. I've written for the music press in the past. And so I thought this is a gift that I can use to share truthful information with large numbers of people and just put it out there into the world. So the decision was taken to write this book. I've written a book before. I wrote one in 2007 called Tales from the Flip Side. And it was very different to this one. So anyone going back and getting a copy of that old book and expecting it to be a conscious read like this one is going to be disappointed, because back in 2007, I was a member of The Walking Dead. So I was just a completely spiritually corrupted, degenerated zombie, like, unfortunately, the majority of the world's population still are. So I knew none of the stuff that I know now back then. But now I know a whole lot. And pretty much everything that I've come to understand is between the covers of that book. So Musical Truth was launched earlier this year, came out in about February. And this year is being spent just getting that book out there and communicating all the information that's in it.
And Mark, before we get into the meat of the subject matter, how is that going? Are you being well received? Are you getting on any mainstream? That's an interesting question. Television shows or radio stations or satellite? Have you been exposed at all to the mainstream, or is this mainly what we would refer to in my world as like the conspiracy network-ish, where you're really getting a welcome reception?
No, I've done nothing for the mainstream, really. I've appeared on 2 radio shows I would describe as mainstream. Okay. And I was wholly prepared for one of them. So I had all the things that I wanted to say in my mind, and I thought I did a pretty good job of trying to get through to people that have never looked at truth/conspiracy/consciousness type subjects. But the second interview that I did, I felt that I got completely stitched up and I wasn't prepared for it. And the interviewer threw me a whole bunch of curveball questions that I wasn't expecting. And I don't feel I came across well on it at all. And I think anyone coming across the information for the first time, the way I put it across in that particular interview is going to be of the view that I'm a tinfoil hat wearing, conspiracy nut job. So all the other interviews that I've done have been within the truth alternative, conspiracy scene, whereby the audience would already have some kind of understanding of the subject areas that I'm talking about. And that goes for the public talks and the conferences that I've appeared at this year as well. So I realized that there would be a lot of value in trying to get this information out to a mainstream type audience. I've not had a whole bunch of offers. It's not the sort of information that mainstream TV and radio channels tend to want somebody talking about. And so I think that's why the invitations have been pretty low on the ground.
Gotcha. And my audience will have to forgive me for a moment. We can edit some of this stuff out. Thank the Lord. But can I just make a suggestion? I used to be in promotions, so I immediately start spinning like I'm your personal agent. So you're just going to have to forgive my suggestion. I honestly think due to the nature of this work and the amount of research you've done, that this would lend itself well to a documentary movie. You have the content. You would just have to get the snippets to make it interesting. And right. This is my promise to you, my friend. If you do that, I think I can get it screened at a large film festival in America. So put that in your possibility of things that might happen in your field. But I really think we could make that happen together. I would say 99.9% sure it could happen.
Well, that sounds great. I mean, one thing that I would like to do, certainly in the interim, and which I'm planning to do, is a David Icke style all-day event where I take all the information in this book, and over the course of 10 to 12 hours, because that honestly is how long it would take, I unpack it chapter by chapter and go through sequentially in a logical, progressive fashion and just present all this information. Mark Passio does this as well, all-day seminars, which last for hours and hours and hours. There's a reason why David Icke events and Mark Passio events last for 10 to 12 hours, because you can't do this information justice in an hour or a couple of hours. So I've been doing a whole bunch of talks, which are an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. And honestly, at the end of those, I feel I've only just scratched the surface. And like I was saying earlier, the stuff that goes on in the music industry is only one spoke in the wheel. It's just one aspect. You could do a whole day seminar on false flag terror events. You could do a whole day seminar on banking scams. You could do a whole day seminar on how the political system is a farce and has been infiltrated. And, my thing is the music industry, but I really do feel that 10 to 12 hours is how long it's going to take to really get people to understand how all these different facets fit together. So once you've established the fact that the music industry is not what we think it is, and it's not run by the people that we're told it is, and that there are dark occult elements to it, and that the military intelligence communities are absolutely up to their necks in it, then you set about trying to break down some of the individual characters, some of the key players, their family backgrounds, their ancestry, how they came to be inducted into the industry. And then you can start to look at things like social engineering programs that were going on in the different decades. You can look at the aspect of trauma-based mind control, MK Ultra, and all of that, and how many celebrities seem to be victims of that particular, institution. Then you can get into symbolism, dark occult symbolism, and Masonic and Kabbalistic symbolism, and numerology that appears in pop videos and live shows. Then you can get into the transhumanist agenda and how that plays out in music and how that fits in with the technology and the changing way of music production. You can get into the sonics of a record and the frequencies and the effect that has on the human energy field and how that's all manipulated. Then you can get into big names like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the connections between them and some of these secret society networks and mystery schools such as the OTO, and that ties into the Process Church of the Final Judgment and the Church of Satan. Then you've got connections there into Hollywood. You've got connections to the Laurel Canyon scene, how that fits again into the military. It goes round and round and round. There's connections, there's overlaps, there's synchronicities everywhere. Now you can start to see why this story takes hours and hours and hours to adequately explain, because you can take an individual component such as, let's say, monarch programming, part of MK Ultra mind control, and you could do a really good job of showing how that works, which celebrities appear to be subjects of it, and all the symbolism that's placed out there in plain sight to give people an opportunity to understand what's going on. But that still is only one facet of it. And if you leave it at that, people are not going to understand why it's done, who's doing it, what's the purpose of it, how does it fit into everything else? So you've got to take the time to unpack it all. It's a very, very deep and complicated subject. And to my thinking, nobody yet has actually put all these pieces together and laid it all out there in that way. So you get people like Freeman, for instance, who gets into symbolism and all the connections into the world of the occult and does a great job of that. And you've got people like Dave McGowan with his amazing book on Laurel Canyon and all the connections into military intelligence. And you get Vigilant Citizen who talks about the symbolism and stuff. But I'm not aware of any author or researcher so far that has laid all this stuff out and shown the links between all these different components and how they fit together and done a full job of presenting the whole spectrum of information. So, if I can be the one to do that, that makes me very happy. But it's going to take some time.
History, except you left out one very near and dear to my heart, Mark, the medical mafia.
Right. Well, them as well.
If you're aware of this, it's even gone across the seas, but we're in the middle of this whole scandal with all the alternative health doctors and medical professionals, particularly the ones working with cancer and GC math, are being offed mysteriously in very bizarre, circumstances. So we're in the middle of all that. So like you said, it goes on and on. Like the rabbit trail is very deep. So we already have some questions, and this will open up some. I want to make sure we get, because I know you and I could talk, like you said, for days on each of these. So one of our questions is, going back to Elvis really quick, is there an actual possibility that then he could show up as an Elvis, I think this is half in jest, as an Elvis impersonator? Is that possible that he could resurface in plain sight, so to say, and mocking us, or just for his entertainment value? Or he would be really old at this point too, I would guess.
Well, yeah, Elvis was born in 1935, so he would be 81 now if he was still alive. So it's not impossible that he could still be alive. And I'll tell you what, when you start looking into the information that I have, and you come to the findings that I have, you come to realize that anything is possible.
Oh, I know.
You also come to realize that those that control these industries, the dark controllers, as I call them, occult practitioners, do love to mock us.
Oh, yeah.
It seems to be one of their tenets. They like to take the P, if I can. I don't know if I can.
You're fine. You can be yourself. However.
All right then. Well, they like to take the piss. They like to mock us. They like to rub our noses in it, and it's a particular dig at researchers such as you and I, who are open-minded and who can see what they're up to. It often seems to me that they're rubbing our noses in it, and they're saying to us, okay, we know you lot can see it, but still 95% of the world's population are going to think you're crazy if you try and communicate this information to them. So what are you going to do about it? It does seem to be that they have a very dark, morbid sense of humor, and they love to mock us. They do it with all these false flags. 9/11, was absolutely drenched in dark humor that you have to be pretty sick to get any kind of kick out of. So the idea of parading somebody like Elvis out there on the public stage still,
isn't impossible.
To me, would tie very much in with the fact that they like to mock us. It also ties in with another tenet, which is the concept of placing the truth right there in plain sight, which is something else that these controllers seem to feel the need to do. And it seems to be a part of their dark religious ideology. It ties into the concept of consent, free will consciousness, and specifically predictive programming. When you get into Hollywood movies, TV shows, music videos and such, what they do is they give you an element of the truth. They let you know what's going on, but it's usually in a very cryptic, encoded form that they know only a few are going to be able to see and understand. And this is an aspect of them hijacking people's free will consciousness and hijacking this capacity that we have as conscious, sentient individuals to consent to certain situations. And so they see it that when they've placed the truth right there in plain sight, so that might be an element of what they plan to do on 9/11 encoded into a Simpsons cartoon in the 1990s. It might be them sticking Elvis Presley out there on stage under a disguise, trying to pass himself off as an impersonator when actually it's the real thing. It could be any of these things, but it's them putting the truth right out there and giving us an opportunity to object. But when we don't object, because how can we when it's not made clear to us what's going on, they take that as us saying, we're okay with this, you can go right ahead and do it. So to not say no is to tacitly say yes in their mentality. Obviously, this is a sick, twisted, distorted way of looking at things, but let's not forget that when we're talking about these dark occult practitioners, they are psychopaths. They're mentally ill. They're not well. So let's not expect them to, be too grounded in all this stuff. So this is a very complicated concept, and I do break it down in one of the chapters in the book, how all this stuff fits together. So it wouldn't surprise me if they do that all the time. And again, going back to what I mentioned about John Lennon and the researcher Miles Mathis, I'm not sure what to make of it. I'm not saying definitely that John Lennon didn't die and is still alive. I'm just saying that it is a possibility. And according to Miles Mathis, he's still performing as a musician under the name of Mark Stacer. There's a movie you can get. It's a bit kind of hard to get, but it is out there, called Let Him Be, which goes into this whole idea that Lennon in some way faked his death. So again, anything is possible. It's not always possible to put your finger on a situation and say, this definitely happened. You have to consider all the possibilities. But as far as this suggestion goes, it could well be the case because of all those reasons I've just outlined.
And that was phenomenal. It opened up like another 8 hours of conversation that we won't go into right now.
I'm trying to keep these answers brief, but
no,
I could really be talking all night.
Like, you know what? I just have to tell you guys, and I have the pleasure in my groups of I think, being with some of the best minds on the planet. But it's so nice to just meet an awake, intelligent person. Like, just thank you for being you, because this is like crack cocaine for me talking to you. So,
we need to keep ourselves sane by having these conversations sometimes.
It encourages me. It helps me know you do feel alone. You do feel sometimes, maybe you don't, but I do, like the prophet in the wilderness saying, can't you guys see? What is it going to take? Sometimes I feel like that. So thank you for coming on and sharing with us. All of us appreciate it. You open up so many things. Let me drop back into that question just really briefly, which is going to open up a whole thing. What is your view on, because one of the newer things that I've learned about through people that I know in the industry that has blown my mind, that I firmly believe, just so everybody on here knows, or that will listen to this, is the subject of cloning. So when you start talking about celebrities appearing alive, that to me, I just start hearing clones. As a matter of fact, Britney Spears has been quoted as saying, I gave permission for them to clone me, and I wish I could take it back. And who is that? There's a guy on Twitter that I follow, and he's always screaming about, I forget his name, but he's a rapper.
Donald Marshall.
Yeah, Donald Marshall's always talking about cloning, and there's a number of people that are always saying, stop the cloning, and we're being cloned, and the stars are cloned, and all that. Yeah, Donald Marshall, what do you think about him and that whole thing as it relates to the music industry?
Well, it's a very out there subject. And I'm no stranger to out there subjects. I've looked at a whole bunch of them.
Right.
But there are some subject areas that I don't feel as compelled to go down that route as I do others. So when it comes to aliens, extraterrestrials, I know a lot of people get very excited about that type of information, and they can talk for days about it. To me, there are so many other areas that I want to study and understand, that something has to give. And some of these subject areas are such minefields that the minute you start to look into them, you're going to get sucked into it and drop down God knows how many other tangents and side routes, So aliens and extraterrestrials is one area, and the idea of cloning is another, that although I've looked at it on the periphery, I've not delved very deeply into it. Again, like I said, anything is possible, and I would not throw anything out by reflex action just because it sounds ridiculous. I spend a lot of time in my book imploring people that are reading it not to throw a particular subject out just because it doesn't sound right. But I've got to say that when it comes to the idea of cloning, it's not a subject area that has resonated with me big time, and that I've felt compelled to really get into. I'm constantly aware of the fact that in this field of truth/conspiracy/consciousness research, there's a lot of disinformation, misinformation, and BS. Some of it is there deliberately. It's put out there by these shills that we hear about the whole time, disinfo agents. So it's systematically put into this soup of information to kind of lead people off down the garden path. Then you have well-meaning researchers that aren't malevolent in any way, but they've just got things wrong. They've got it twisted, and they're putting erroneous information out, but not willingly. And when it comes to the whole subject area of cloning, I'm inclined to think that that there's a lot of that stuff in there. I've heard suggestions that many famous celebrities have been cloned. Eminem is a popular one that you get many times, as is Britney Spears. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but sometimes you have to go with your intuition. Sometimes you have to go with your instinct and what resonates with you. And what I'm getting when I look at that whole subject area is that I think there's a lot of dis and misinformation going on. And it's not something that I've felt compelled to look at in a serious way. So that's just my personal view on things. Others may disagree.
It just brought up to mind when, she's saying, could Elvis be there? I'm thinking, I went,
Sure.
Went to that. Okay, let's get to other questions. Okay, so one of the questions is, when the deaths are faked, you're talking about the possibility of some of these famous people having their deaths faked. Do their families know they're still alive? Or is this a complete deception.
I think there would have to be complicity on the part of close family and friends. The big case that I've looked at for days, and which I've had many heated, passionate arguments with other people about, is the question of Paul McCartney and the idea that Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced. As far as I'm concerned, that happened. So in the book, when I was writing the book, I've done a chapter of 15,000 words going into this whole Paul is dead subject area. And at the time, I took quite a balanced approach. So I wasn't definitely saying that it had happened. I was presenting all the information, and there's a whole world of it to support the idea that McCartney is not who we think he is today. But now, since the book was published, having done a whole load of further research and spoken to other people that have looked into this area, I'm now absolutely convinced that the fellow we see today presented to us as Paul McCartney is not the original James Paul McCartney. Wow. That switch took place. So there's a whole load of symbolic clues that relate to this switch in Beatles records, backmasked audio recordings, visual clues on record sleeves, particularly the Sgt. Pepper album and the Abbey Road album, but also visual clues in promotional photographs and stuff like that. But I know there's a lot of people that would consider themselves scientifically minded and very grounded in this 3D reality, and they don't go in for esoteric and occult stuff, and they don't place any value on symbolism. They like their evidence to be scientific and fact-based. Okay, well, that's fine, because when it comes to Paul is dead, you get a whole bunch of that as well. There were a couple of Italian forensic scientists who wrote an article in 2009 for Wired magazine in Italy. And these two people had worked for years in the Italian judiciary system, very closely with police, on some very high-profile criminal cases. And they were very respected as forensic scientists. They knew exactly what to look for. And they set out to debunk this ridiculous notion that Paul McCartney could have been replaced. Their idea was to settle the thing once and for all, to show that it couldn't possibly be true. When they looked at the forensic evidence and they started comparing photographs of McCartney from before 1966 and after, and they compared things like the shape of the face, the shape of the jawline, the distance between the eyes, the structure of the nose, the height, and everything else, the teeth, they changed their viewpoint, and they came to the conclusion that this cannot possibly be the same person. You're looking at photographs of two completely different people. So there you go with some fact-based, scientific, hard, peer-reviewed evidence, because there's been others as well, for those people that don't place any value in symbolism and stuff. So whichever way you like to look at these things, as far as myself is concerned and many other researchers into this area, it has been concluded that McCartney was replaced. You get a whole bunch of other clues as well, not least the comments that Heather Mills made in 2007 in a couple of very high-profile mainstream media interviews, where in a very hysterical state, she seemed to be implying that she discovered this terrible secret about McCartney, this man that she'd married. And she made it clear that she wasn't talking about infidelity. She appeared to be spilling the beans as far as she possibly could without getting herself knocked off at that point with regard to what happened. So getting back to the question of whether the family know when somebody has been replaced, I think they have to. And people always ask the question, well, how could you get that level of complicity from that number of people? Why does nobody come out and say what actually happened?
I thought that. So that's true.
We're faced with a number of possibilities here. First of all, for something like Paul McCartney to have been replaced, we're looking at massive complicity from the British intelligence services, MI5, MI6. They have to have been in on it. There's no way this thing could have been covered up if they weren't in on it. There's also the fact that McCartney was knighted by the Queen, and background checks are supposed to take place with regards to anyone that the Queen or any other royals come into contact with through MI5. So if this switch had taken place, that would have been uncovered in these background checks. So we're looking at massive complicity on that front. So it suddenly becomes very dangerous for anyone to want to speak out if this is a kind of national secret and there's this level of complicity in place. You also have the possibility of massive payoffs, which have been known to buy people's silence. And I'm reminded of when Heather Mills McCartney did all these interviews and she was saying, my life is in danger. I've got a box of evidence which is going to go to a certain party if anything happens to me. I've discovered these devastating secrets. Very quickly after she did those interviews, she shut the F up and was never heard from again. This was 2007, nearly 10 years ago. She's barely said a word about it since. So what are the possibilities there if that's what she was talking about? It's got to be a massive payoff of many, many millions of pounds. Here you go. Keep your mouth shut. Never speak about this again. Or the threat of something happening to you or those that you care about. That's another possibility. The idea that something can happen to you or your loved ones, made very explicitly to you, has been known to buy people's silence in many matters. And it's very understandable how that would be the case. Then there's another factor. We know from extensive research that mind control, trauma-based mind control, MK Ultra, Monarch programming, and all these other different divisions of it are very much in place in the entertainment industry, and they come out of the world of military intelligence, and there are links and connections everywhere with all these artists. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that certain people can be put into a mind-controlled state whereby they're programmed to never speak about certain things. So to me, these are all possibilities. Massive payoffs, horrific threats of consequences should you speak out, mind control, and also oaths of secrecy to various different secret societies. As I mentioned earlier, the entertainment industry is tied into all these different secret societies steeped in the occult, such as the OTO, the Church of Satan, the Process Church, and many, many others. And membership of these groups involves taking oaths of secrecy, whereby you undertake to never divulge certain secrets for the rest of your days. It's interesting to me that all these revelations about Jimmy Savile, I'm sure people are very familiar with who Jimmy Savile was and everything that we've come to discover about what he got up to, which only came out after his death in 2011, happened that way. It seems to me as if oaths of secrecy to these various networks, these various groups, these various mystery schools are in place for as long as a certain individual is alive in this world. And they seem to expire when that individual exits this reality, leaves their body. And that's why we got all this information about Savile only after he died. We're getting a lot of information now about a whole bunch of prominent British MPs and establishment figures in terms of them having been serial paedophiles over a large number of years. The story broke a few weeks ago about Sir Clement Freud. There you go, there's another one, Sir. Descended, of course, from Sigmund Freud, part of that whole family, but it came out in the mainstream press recently that Sir Clement Freud was actually a paedophile and abuser of children. We got it about Sir Cyril Smith. We got it about Leon Britton. We got it about Lord McAlpine, and we got it about Lord Greville Janner. But the full disclosure about what these individuals got up to only came out after their death. So they could not be held accountable for it in any way. It's very interesting to me to reflect on what's going to happen when this person we think of as Paul McCartney leaves this reality.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I wonder if we're going to get the full revelation and full confirmation of the fact that Paul McCartney was replaced after this guy, Paul, as he's known, fake Paul, leaves us. Don't discount the possibility that it's going to come out fully once he's gone. And of course, this could only happen when the Queen of England is no longer with us as well, because she knighted this guy. And the public scandal that would ensue if this information came out on the public record while she's still alive is something that they would not allow to happen. But, you know, how long have these people got? The Queen is 90. The guy that is playing Paul is, if he's the same age as Paul McCartney, he's 74 now.
Wow.
But researchers think that, Paul was actually born in 1937, which would make him 79 this year. So within the next 15 to 20 years, we're looking at a situation where this disclosure could take place. And so watch this space, because things could get very interesting when it does.
Speaking of danger, and we have other questions, but speaking of danger, are you never afraid of that this research and some of the things you've discovered and some of the people you talk to and some of the topics you're exposing are putting your life in danger, or your loved ones in danger? Have you thought about that? And why have you chosen to go ahead and be so prolific, write such a prolific work and cover really, to be honest, you could anger like every sector of those of the cabal that runs this world. I mean, every sector, just skimming through your book, you can see that you touch on virtually every sector. And have you thought about the consequence of coming forth and writing this kind of book?
Well, of course, you think about it. I think anyone that's putting out this kind of information spends some time reflecting on what they might be bringing on themselves. But there's an answer that David Icke always gives when he gets this question. I've heard him have this question put to him many times. They've said, how are you still here? How have they not taken you out? Right. And he gives an answer which resonates with me big time. He always says, they don't take me out because they can't, because I won't allow it. I mean, he sometimes gives a different answer, which is, he is so high profile now, and he is so well known around the world, that if he had an accident, it would be so obvious that foul play was in place that it would cause a whole bunch of people who previously had written him off as a conspiracy, tinfoil hat wearing nut job, to think, well, hang on a minute, maybe he was right. What was he actually saying? Right. Let me get hold of some of his books and find out what he was saying.
I love it.
And that would expose his work to a whole bunch of people who otherwise wouldn't have looked at it. So there's no value in them doing that from that point of view. But the other answer that he gives is, they don't take me out because I don't allow that scenario to take place. This is one that resonates with me, and it takes a bit of explaining, but you come to realize that we shape the experiences that we undergo physically with our thoughts and our will and our consciousness. And you can actually, manifest certain scenarios according to the consciousness that you apply to it. And you can also negate certain possibilities with effect of the consciousness and the will that you apply to it. This can be done on a collective level as well as an individual level. And something that I harp on about all the time is the fact that the minute large numbers of people, the minute a crucial sector of humanity realizes that our consciousness and our will and our intent is the key to what we experience, then we can overwrite this system of human slavery that we currently have overnight. We can overwrite all this dark energy and this malevolent control system with something that is so much better for humanity and from which we all benefit virtually immediately. It just needs that crucial tipping point of positive awareness and consciousness to be put into the morphogenic field. So this can be done on an individual basis as well. And if you apply your consciousness and your will to a situation and you state that a certain scenario is something that you're not going to bring into your realm of existence, is something that you will not entertain, is something that you will not allow to manifest, then you can actually have that physical effect. So if you apply your consciousness to the certainty that you're going to be able to continue doing the work you need to do, and you're going to be kept safe from harm, and you're going to be protected for as long as it's necessary, you can actually manifest that. I hope that makes sense to people. It's the best way I can describe it. Then the other part to it is that I'm someone who so far has enjoyed pretty much flying below the radar. I think you reach a point where you become very high profile. The likes of David Icke obviously are very highly recognized around the world, and they have public profiles, and they're pretty much household names within this realm of research. But I've always enjoyed being somebody that has put information out, but I've not shouted too loudly about it, and I've not courted too much publicity and public exposure. I like to make the information available for those that come searching for it. And I like to give people the opportunity to understand these things if the will is there on their part to understand it. But I don't like to shout too loudly about it. And I think you can do quite an effective job of flying below the radar if you don't make too much noise about yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I hope that one makes sense as well.
Believe me, I absolutely know what you mean. And it's very familiar with my audience, although not all my audience will be watching this. There'll be an extended audience. But I love what you said, and we do this thing in my house, which sometimes I'll slip up and I'll say, oh, I hope I don't get sick. And even my kids will say, Mom, take that out of the Kwanzaa. And we literally go through this thing. I say, oh, yeah. And I do this little hand thing, and I'm like, I pull that out of the Kwanzaa. And that's kind of what you're saying. You're saying don't put that out there for manifestation, whatever.
Let me just mention Jordan Maxwell. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the great author, researcher, scholar, Jordan Maxwell. So I've studied his work for many years. I've listened to many of his interviews. But one thing I've noticed about Jordan Maxwell is he tends to take a very pessimistic view of things. So pretty much every interview I've heard him in, he said, humanity is doomed and we've got to wake up, or our future is not worth imagining, and the world we're going to leave to our kids is just going to be a nightmare, and they're going to take me out for saying this. I know so much information that if I try and put it out there, they would knock me off tomorrow. I won't see the sun rise in the morning, and, I'm going to pay a price for putting this information out. And when you are kind of drenching yourself in that energy and that consciousness and that intent, which is fear-based. Yes. When you're thinking, oh, they're going to get me for this, and it's all doomed and there's no hope, guess what you draw to yourself? That would be more of the same, because you're syncing and you're vibing with fear-based, negative, low-density energy, and like attracts like. So you're going to bring a lot of that to yourself. So I've been listening to Jordan Maxwell talking about, I know all this stuff, but something's going to happen to me. And guess what? The other week, he had a heart attack. Oh, really? Now, he's okay. Thankfully, he's okay. He got rushed to hospital. There was a heart specialist in the hospital, he says, who, tended to him immediately, and he very quickly convalesced and was back at home. But it speaks volumes to me that this guy underwent a heart attack when he's in the midst of doing all these interviews saying they're going to get me and we're all doomed and stuff. Because if that's all you ever think, you're going to attract those type of scenarios to you. So I think it's very important to try and stay in a good place in terms of your consciousness and stay full of positive intent and keep it love-based rather than fear-based. I know it's difficult to do that sometimes. People often ask me, how can you deal with all this dark information that you get into? You talk about ritual sacrifice, demonic possession, trauma-based mind control of children, sexual abuse of children. This stuff is horrific. It's awful information. But it needs to be put out there, and it needs to be understood, because it's only ever going to come to an end when people face up to the fact that it's going on. So if you're someone that's undertaken the job of putting this information out there, there's no value in you allowing yourself to be dragged down into that cesspit and to get depressed and to get bogged down with all this dark negative energy. You've got to find a way of being able to put the information out there, but stay above it and stay in a good place yourself so that you don't, go down in some way.
And be influenced.
Your health, your health doesn't suffer, whether that's physically or spiritually. You've got to be able to stay in a place where you can put this stuff out. So that's something I've come to understand. And I think it's very important that people looking at this information take it on board, but keep themselves in a good and positive place consciously, because that stuff is so powerful. And, Absolutely. It has such a bearing on everything else.
Yeah, and that's what they want. And I think, the people that work with me know that. They want that fear in our field. They want to have that fear control. And, there's really, at the root of all emotions, and we talk about this a lot in my groups, there's only fear and love. and they sure aren't dishing out love. So, one way to combat that, if you guys do get even in this, and I should have put a disclaimer on this because I don't know if we will, but I am warning you guys, some of this stuff that we could get into that we haven't really gotten into could be offensive to your sensibilities. It could be things that shock you or traumatizing, particularly if you're a sensitive person. So I do want to warn you that this material is not for the faint of heart. So be aware that we could get into.
They should say that at the start of the mainstream evening news, don't you think? That should be a disclaimer you get on CNN.
No, I think they should start with the evening news. This is entertainment. This is entertainment. The people that like dark stuff, because we all know, well, most of us know 90% of it or more is not true. Let me well,
something I came to realize recently, Kimberly, I know we're darting around here, but I think it's all relevant. It dawned on me that the mainstream news, when you switch on your TV or you pick up a so-called newspaper, is all BS. It's fantasy, it's lies, it's propaganda, and it's mind control. So they're lying to you all the time. But isn't it perverse that if you want the truth about what's really going on in the world, you find it in Hollywood movies and TV shows and cartoons and pop music videos? So they're putting this stuff in there. You can call it predictive programming or you can call it symbolism or whatever, but there's so much truth that they encode into all these things. And so we're trained to think that Hollywood movies are fantasy, imagination, escapism. You don't place any credibility on it because it's just, entertainment. But the evening news is where you find out the truth of what's going on in the world. What if, in this satanically inverted world in which we live, where everything is upside down and tipped on its head, the reverse is actually true? And the news is lying to you all the time. And all these establishment sources are lying to you all the time. Politicians lie. The scientific community, in terms of the establishment, lie to you all the time. Academia lies to you all the time. But if you want the truth, you have to go to what we're trained to think of as fantasy and imagination. Hollywood movies, the music industry, that's where the real truths lie. Of course, you've got to be able to learn to read the symbolism and understand what they're putting across and, converse in that language. But that is where the truth lies. Isn't that a ridiculous scenario to be living in?
That whole time you were talking about that is so profound. I just want to reiterate that to whoever is watching or listening to this or who will in the future. Please rewind that and let that sink in your field, because I have started, and people probably are like, why is Dr. Kimberly always telling us to watch these movies? But I've started to. I'm just like, you know what? I could talk for 30 minutes about this, or you could just go watch Eyes Wide Shut if we're talking about some of these things. Or you can just go watch this. As a matter of fact, and I know this isn't your thing, Mark, but there's a specific reason. I told my children, this is their new requirement, and I'm a crazy mom. You guys know that. But I said, your new requirement is we're going to get the old series of V, and each person is going to watch it, and then we're going to talk about that over a series of nights. How crazy is that, Mark, that I'm requiring that as education for my children about the possibility of these other energies coming in and working with, and that's part of the whole call system, and it overlaps into alien, but it's bigger than all that.
Right.
But it's exactly what you're saying. I have to go to Hollywood movies to educate my children. I can't pick up a magazine or a song or church. I can't even go to church anymore. And I have to tell you, Mark, one of my most horrific experiences, and I've shared these with a select few. We could go way down this trail too, and we won't. We'll come back because there's still more questions. I know you guys are going to yell at me if I don't.
What time were we finishing? 3 a.m., wasn't it?
Oh yeah. I forgot to tell you guys, get your snacks, get your sleeping bags, get your chargers.
No, we could certainly be here till 3 a.m. today.
But I just have to tell you my most traumatizing thing, and I'm going to bring in the music a little bit in this. I just discovered, and this is going to tell my age, so don't try to figure it out, you guys, but that one of my favorite songs of all time when I was a child, which was You Light Up My Life by Debbie Boone, I just discovered that was a song that she wrote to her wonderful master, Mr. Satan himself. Do you know how devastating that is to me, Mark? That she's a product of MK Ultra. And wait, let's follow the trail like, Mark's talking about. Let's follow the trail a little more to the full devastation. Where did she sing that song? Maybe you guys aren't aware, but one of the places she sang that song, the reason it became a hit, she sang that And this is big. I live in North Carolina. I drive down this highway. Reverend Billy Graham. He sang that at these crusades.
Right.
And you follow it, and it gets deeper. And then I started following that trail, and I learned Mr. Reverend Billy Graham is a full-blown Satanist. And I imagine Franklin Graham, and I imagine Ruth Graham. I don't know, but I'm guessing. And then we go to where he lives, which is on top of Black Mountain. What's under Black Mountain? A military base.
Right.
I found out he slept with his eyes open, which is a sign, one of the signs, not the only sign, but one of the signs of being programmed, just on and on. Right. Mark, it's devastating. Like, my whole world is just shattered. I'm like, I used to love that song and listen to it.
Let me just pick up on a couple of things you said there, and I'll try and remember everything, because when you were speaking, there were like 4 things I wanted to bring up. First of all, you mentioned that Billy Graham, we think of him as a Christian minister, but in actual fact, you said he's a Satanist. Another example of inversion in this world. So when we're told something by an official establishment source, you can generally take it that the opposite is true. So, you know, a politician, Bush or Obama or Blair or Cameron, we got Theresa May as our new prime minister today. Jesus, wish us luck. At the same time as you guys are getting Hillary probably in a few months. So
my guess too, yes.
You know, the world is going to be run by these women who have bigger balls down there than their predecessors did, which is a devastating thing. But here I am getting sidetracked. When you get a politician like Bush or Obama, let's say, who wages some foreign war in Syria or Libya, take your pick, they usually announce it by saying, we're bringing democracy to these countries. We need war in order for there to be peace. It's about saving these people, protecting them from an evil dictator. Okay, so the opposite is what's really going on here. They're wars of conquest. They want to go in and obliterate these countries. They want to kill as many people as possible. They don't give a damn about civilians. It's usually about oil. It's usually about putting American infrastructures into these countries. But they tell us it's all about democracy. So my point is, anytime any establishment figure tells you one thing, flip it right around and there will be the truth of the matter. This seems to be another of their religious ideological tenets, to invert everything. It's a tenet of Satanism. And unfortunately, the people we have running this world at this present time are Satanists and Luciferians. That's the fact of the matter. You mentioned Billy Graham, and Billy Graham cropped up in the case that there has recently been against Cliff Richard.
Okay.
Have you been following the legal case about Cliff Richard?
No, I haven't, but that's interesting.
Okay, so Cliff Richard is one of the most high-profile British singers of all time. He started out in the late 1950s. He was a contemporary of Elvis Presley, and in the early days, he was kind of dubbed the British Elvis. So he was like our take on what was happening with that rock and roll thing. And he's had a very long, very successful career. In the 1960s, he came out as a Christian, so-called. He said that, you know, he'd found Christ and he was going to be a Christian singer from that point on. And for many years, he put out all these sickening, schmaltzy, sugary, Christmas records like Saviour's Day and Mistletoe and Wine and all these horrible songs that all had these Christian sentiments. However, there's a lot more to know about Cliff Richard. When you go back to the very early days of the industry, he was implicated with some very interesting figures, including Lord Bob Boothby. There's a lord. Lords are the same as sirs. Whenever there's a lord or a sir, paedophilia is never going to be far from the picture. Trust me. It seems to be a badge of honor that is given to these individuals for services rendered to the establishment. There may be a few exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, if it's a sir or a lord, be very afraid, be very suspect. So Cliff Richard was also closely linked to the Kray twins, who were these notorious gangsters coming out of the East End of London in the 1960s. If Americans think of Charles Manson and the Manson family, the Krays were like the British version of Manson. They terrorized London gangland in the 1960s. So who knew that Cliff Richard was tied in with these characters? We get into mind control, we get into elite paedophilia there, all these links, all these overlaps. Can't go into it now, but there are documents available if people want to research this stuff further. Cliff Richard's father worked for Thorn EMI, which, as well as being a record company, like many others, like Decca and RCA and Capitol, actually had one finger in the military intelligence world and, weapons systems for government. A lot of these record companies had a subsidiary arm to their activities, which was all about military intelligence. So Cliff Richard's dad worked in that world, and he's one of only so many prominent musicians whose fathers came out of military intelligence, as my book shows, as the work of Dave McGowan shows, as the work of Jan Irvin has shown, and so many other researchers. So there was this legal case which emerged in 2014 involving Cliff Richard, where the police in South Yorkshire, here in England, were investigating claims that a bunch of minors, young boys, were sexually molested at a Christian rally taking place in Sheffield. This was a Christian rally staged by Billy Graham, who we just mentioned. Cliff Richard was present at these events, and there were a couple of claims that came forward that these young boys were sexually molested, and the suggestion was that it was at the hands of these two. So this legal case, this legal investigation was launched. It went on for 2 years, and only, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, the case was finally dropped, with police saying they didn't have enough evidence to be able to make a case against Cliff Richard. But as far as the public was concerned, this painted this guy's image in a very different light to the squeaky clean, family-friendly Christian image that we'd all had of him for so long. Although truth researchers that really look into these things have suspected for some time that there's a lot more to know about the true nature of Cliff Richard. Nothing has been proven in terms of it getting on the public record, so there's nothing I can say for definite about what Cliff Richard may or may not have got up to, or, who his associates are. But we do know he was associated with Billy Graham. We do know he was associated with some of these other characters. And again, it just seems that nothing is the way it's presented to us with the surface gloss, and there's always more to know, and those that care to do the research can find some very interesting stuff about all these artists when they delve beneath the surface. That was me picking up on your comment about Billy Graham. I'm not going to go down the Billy Graham trail. I'm just going to get me going, but anyway. There you go. People that present themselves in public as Christians probably are the exact opposite. And the exact opposite of a Christian is a Satanist.
Yeah, I love that. And it's really sad, too, because you mentioned a comment I want to piggyback on really quick, and then I'm going to ask questions, I promise you guys. But it's so funny because every time I hear a name in the news or a song comes on or I see somebody anymore, it's really sad because I swear I spend half my day, and you'll say this is negative, it drives my kids nuts, and I really have to stop it. But I just say Satanist. I say Satanist like 1,000 times a day. But I think I'm training my kids. I want my kids to discern. And we're all about frequency here. So I want them to match that song by The Weeknd. How does that feel to be under that kind of spell of a Satanist? How does that feel? Satanist. Not cool singer, not great music. How does that feel to be seduced, in that energy? How does that feel? And how does it differ from the frequency of love, from the frequency of balance, from the frequency of awakened expansion? So a lot of that is for training, with my children. But it's crazy because I find myself doing that more, having that observation more than ever. Like it's all of it. You just said it, kind of. It's just any media. It's all that. Like I don't even know if there's anyone that's not anymore.
Well, this is a very valid point. And I listened to a couple of interviews with Dave McGowan, the author that I mentioned earlier, who sadly is no longer with us. He passed away in November last year. But in a couple of interviews that I listened to, he said that he finds it very difficult to enjoy movies anymore because he'll go and see a movie and a prominent Hollywood actor will come on the screen and he will know that individual has sold their soul for fame and fortune. This is a phrase you hear often, and people think it's just some clever, pithy kind of phrase. But there is a very real sense in which these celebrities do literally sell their souls and degrade their humanity in exchange for the fame and fortune. There's many different ways in which that's done. In some cases, these celebrities come from long-standing ancestral bloodlines, which are deemed very important to the overall elite agenda that goes on. So throughout the generations, these people are just put to use in the public eye in some role or other, and they have very little choice in the matter as a result of the bloodline that they just happen to have been born into. And it seems to me that certain roles are selected for these individuals to be put into. So some of them are coerced into the world of politics. Some of them go into the world of big business. You could think of people like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Richard Branson. Then other people are put into the world of Hollywood, so they become Hollywood actors. And then others go on to become musicians. So that's the way these people get embroiled in the whole thing. Then you get artists who seem to be the victim of mind control, trauma-based mind control. So they undergo these programs as very young kids. You can think of people like Britney Spears and Miley Cyrus would be a couple of good examples who came out of the Disney corporation, which is an absolute hotbed of trauma-based mind control.
Pinpoint Disney. Yeah. Even the healer, you guys know, excuse me, it's just for my people, that calls himself the voice of Disney. Just put that in your mind. Keep going. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Disney is a deeply satanic organization. So when you get people like Britney Spears, Miley Cyrus, for example, they've had very little choice in the matter because they've just been pushed into this world. And it's by virtue, again, of what they've been born into. But then you get other artists, and I usually cite Jay-Z as a good example, and probably Eminem as well. So these are people that have grown up in lives of poverty. They've come out of the ghetto. They've got nothing, but they've got phenomenal talent as, rappers or producers or musicians or whatever it is. And so one day, a knock comes on the door, and a record industry executive with a checkbook in a nice suit with a shiny car parked outside says to somebody like Jay-Z or Eminem, "We've taken note of your talent. We think you could go a long way. We want you to sign a contract with our corporation, and we're going to make you a massive household name celebrity, but you have to do what we say. Here are the terms and conditions." So for somebody that's grown up in the ghetto and has been slinging crack for a living and, has just lived a life of hustling and petty crime and has never had 2 dimes to rub together, to suddenly get an offer like that, of the promise of millions and millions if you just sign on the dotted line, it's an offer that very few people are going to refuse if they don't understand the true nature of what it is they're getting into. And so this, I think, is the way that they get a lot of other artists on program. And it's only later down the line that they come to realize the terrible, devastating nature of what it is they've got themselves into. You can listen to some of the lyrics of Eminem and also Kanye West, and they're kind of telling you in some of their songs the regret that they feel at what it is they've got themselves into, because now they realize it's too late to get out of it. So there's all these different ways that they get people on board. But you come to realize that if somebody is a household name, A-list celebrity that everyone's heard of, then in some way they're corrupted, they're dirty, they're part of the program, because you can't get there otherwise. You can't be famous to that degree unless you're doing some work for this cabal, unless you're down with the program in some way. I think maybe in previous decades, there could have been celebrities that made it to the top purely because they need these industries. There needs to be a Hollywood film industry. There needs to be a corporate music industry. And there need to be artists that keep the cogs of these machines turning over so that it can just exist. So I think in the past, they've allowed certain individuals to become rich and famous just to be able to keep those industries going. But I think things have reached the stage now where anyone that's up there is a part of the program. And so, Dave McGowan was saying he can't watch a movie now. He can't listen to one of his old albums. He can't put on a Byrds album or a Doors album without being reminded of the fact that all these artists came out of military intelligence. They came out of the CIA. They came out of the Tavistock Institute or the Frankfurt School or whatever it was, and they are therefore in some way dirty. And then you listen to researchers like Jan Irvin of Gnostic Media, and he will tell you that any kind of cultural hero, not just a musician or an actor, but somebody like, Dr. Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna and all these heroes of the counterculture scene and psychedelic hallucinogens and stuff, they were all products of the CIA as well. So there's no genuine heroes. There are no genuine icons. They've all been placed there. All of culture is manipulated. And I can understand how devastating it is for people to take that on board. That's why you get so much denial. That's why when you suggest that everything has been manipulated and all these people we've held up as cultural heroes are actually doing work for their controllers, people just aren't having it. They will get very defensive. They will get very aggressive. They will shoot you down. Sometimes they even want to kill you for suggesting it. That's what a good job in mind control has been done on the general public over an extended period of time. Again, it goes back to a thing that I mentioned at the very start of the interview. You're either an individual who wants truth no matter what and is prepared to go wherever it takes them, no matter how ugly it is, and no matter how much you might have to revise your worldview and rethink some people that you'd previously hailed as heroes, or you don't. You're one thing or the other. You embrace truth fully or you reject it. So which camp are people in? You can't have one foot in each camp when it comes to this. You can't be a halfway player.
You can't. And that's why when I took the hit, I hate to tell you, because I've been involved in this starting when I was in the 20s, and you guys know this, when I got involved with occult ritual sacrifice outside of Chicago. You may not know this, but I have psychic abilities, and I was pulled in due to some information I had and some knowledge that I was being given to work with occult crimes. And the occult crimes we were working with, which people are like, that doesn't happen. And this was years ago, of course, a number of covens and secret organizations, obviously, around the area that I was. And they were finding, gosh, I'm sorry, you guys. I mean, if you're going to be offended, you guys need to just stop this for a while or turn it off or go do something else or rewind or fast forward or whatever. But, mutilated infant organs and all sorts of things in graveyards, and it was a mess. But so I'm used to that. I'm used to taking the hit. That was very devastating to a 20-year-old or 21-year-old, 22-year-old. But when it comes into the sacred, like religion, I had to take that same hit of Billy Graham and how I had been programmed. And I realized I'd been programmed by the churches I went to Christian school, Mark, programmed just the same way a Satanist is programmed. There's no difference. It's the same technology. And I want you guys to be aware of this. It's the same methodology. And I'm gonna burn a sacred cow right here, right now. And I hope Mark agrees with me. There are those same programmers in the world of the awakened, purportedly. In consciousness, we have programmers that are doing the exact same thing that happened. And I think you guys are aware of that. We do things called junk consciousness. I'm actually writing a book about my experience with it. But you cannot, it's question everything. And you have a number of beautiful quotes in your book. You guys have to get the book. Literally question everything. Whether it's I would go to a David Icke seminar. I'd go to your seminar, Mark, and question everything. And I hope you would come to mine and do the same thing. I'm not asking you guys to believe anything I say, anything Mark says. Do the research. If you are a high frequency awakened being, it will vibrate. Truth vibrates on a certain resonance. There's a reason that they were talking about. They use 666 frequency to put a lot of their message from the radio towers out there. Why? Because that's their thing, and you go into all the symbology and why and all that. It doesn't matter. If you're holding the frequency of 528, if you're holding the frequency of the solfeggio tones, if you're holding your sacred geometry, that 666, it's going to be overpowered by all the beautiful things that we are, have availed. But I want you guys to question everything, whether it's in religion, whether it's in your church, whether it's in a, satanic coven meeting, it doesn't matter. There is no realm. At this point in history, at one time there might have been pieces, like you said, and parts and people that were not touched. But I think we live in a time where they have the net is pretty well woven and saturated. And the awakened are few, and truth is not readily available. So when I come upon this book and this, a man like you, like, we got to get that out there. And it's an important work, and it's tremendous important subject matter. But even my dad's a pastor, indoctrinate. My parents go to Billy Graham, you guys, every Thursday, and they work for this organization, and it sickens me. And I've tried to talk to them. I've tried to share. I've sent them videos. I've sent them white and black things of Masonic involvement and on and on. They can't hold it. They can't take that in. And I hope you guys aren't going to be like that. I hope you can at least take it in and consider. Okay, Mark, let me ask you. I want to keep him forever because we could, as we know. We go to the next question.
Just before you go to the next question, I see there are some questions coming in, so I'm happy to address those. But picking up on something you said, a lot of researchers in this field often say, don't just take something I say at face value. Don't just believe me because I'm saying it. Go and check it out for yourself. And it's a very valid point. And I repeat that in the book. So I say, don't just take my word for it. Go and check the information out. This is the reason why at the end of each chapter, I've included huge resource section. A whole bunch of books that I recommend, YouTube videos that I recommend, blog sites that I recommend. And you will find if you go to this wide eclectic array of sources from many different researchers in many different countries, they all back up the stuff that I'm saying. So it's not just one individual putting this information out there. Yes. You will find that everything I put out there checks out, and I give you the opportunity to go to these other resources and these other citations to make sure it does check out. So that's a very important thing. And there was another point I was going to pick up on, but I've forgotten what it was.
You're like me. It comes like so quick. Like I've written like so many things.
We're going so many places here.
Right.
If it comes back to me, I'll let you know.
Okay, you did. That's a good deal. All right, so Sylvia says, when a performer gets signed, is it a given that they are always, which we kind of addressed this, signing up to work for the dark side at time of, and I would call there's always a first signing and a second signing, but that's my opinion. How does the music get prepared to dupe the public into being used or taken over?
Right, well, they have their chosen ones. They have their favorites. So it doesn't mean that every artist that comes into the industry at entry level is going to end up being corrupted and being brought into these satanic programs and have their music used in that way. They choose the ones they want to elevate to the top. So at any given time, there's prominent positions available as like the top hip-hop artist, the top R&B singer, the top country artist, the top rock group, and they just usher individual players into these positions to take these roles. There are many reasons why they select certain individuals. Like I said, some of them come from important bloodlines. Some of them are the products of mind control, generational satanic ritual abuse and mind control, and they just get pushed into these positions. Others are chosen. I mentioned Jay-Z and Eminem and Kanye West as examples earlier. Rihanna would be another one. And, they reach a level where it's spotted by certain parties within the industry that these individuals could be very useful to them in terms of being co-opted into an agenda. And I think there's a point where they get stepped up a few rungs of the ladder and maybe they sign a new contract and they get to the 20 million club or the 50 million club or whatever it is. And once you're there, that's it. You're one of the chosen ones. You're one of their favorites. You're doing their work properly for them now. But the other part of the question was, how does the music get prepared? Here's another important point. What they often do with artists that go on to become prominent players in this satanic agenda is they start off by disarming the public and putting them off their guard, by getting these artists familiar through a certain style of music that they put out. I'll give you two examples. One from back in the day would be the Beatles, and I cite them often. The Beatles' music changed big time round about 1966. And of course, 66 is the year that's given for the McCartney replacement. But if you look at the Beatles' output from when they first emerged in 1962 with Love Me Do, and then Please Please Me, From Me to You, Twist and Shout, I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You, Help, A Hard Day's Night, all this stuff. Those songs for the first 3 to 4 years were very innocent, pleasant, likable pop songs. Your auntie could get down with it. Your granny could get down with it. They weren't offensive in any way. They were just nice, pleasant, blues-based rock songs. Then in 66, when there were so many social changes starting to take place both in the UK and the US, so you had the emergence of LSD, you had the Vietnam War had started, you had the Church of Satan and the Process Church were coming on the scene.